All right, with a run of high-profile recalls, one might expect that sales of GM cars would be a bit off, but customers are unfazed by the widely publicized series of recalls the company issued. The automaker just posted its best month in 6 years, with sales up 13% in May. So we're asking the question, why hasn't the recall scandal made more of an impact on dealership floors? Well, joining us with some insights from Philadelphia is Chris Malone. He's the author of The Human Brand, a book focused on recalls at Tylenol and Toyota. He is also managing partner at Fidelum Partners, a consulting and strategy firm. So, Chris, what is it? Is it that Americans basically accept there's going to be recalls, there's danger on the road, buy a car anyway?
No, actually, I don't think so, Steph. And as you mentioned, our firm has actually conducted pretty extensive research on product recalls over the last several years. And when we examine the fundamentals of this GM recall, it actually is not very surprising to us that sales haven't been impacted yet, because the circumstances are very different than what we saw with Toyota in 2010.
What do you mean by that, Chris? The circumstances are different.
Yeah, so what we found in our research is that really 5 factors that drive how and when customers respond to recalls are, first, awareness of the recall, severity of the risk that's posed, the proximity of that risk to the product that's on the shelf today, how they handle the recall, and then the reputation when the recall starts. And in GM's case, it's really that proximity of the risk. The models that were most affected by the most severe risk have been off the shelf for the last 4 years, and so customers today don't feel that risk very directly.
Look,
and so we see the impact being delayed.
The numbers clearly bear that out. GM sales up something like 13% last month. But it really defies the conventional wisdom, doesn't it? One would think that potential car buyers hear the word recall and say, I guess I'll buy a Ford.
Yeah, actually what we find is that the reputation damage takes longer to filter into consumer behavior, and that the pattern that we are seeing with GM is actually more similar to that which we saw with Lululemon, despite that they're in very different categories, that the sales impact wasn't seen for 6 to 9 months later, and that we think that may be the case with GM as well.
How much does cost play a role here? Can GM, I guess, stem some of the reputational damage, or at least the potential damage to its sales by offering consumers more incentives, discounts, rebates, the kinds of things that we saw a lot of before the financial crisis, but which have become scarcer as the companies like GM and Ford have become better managed?
They absolutely do make an impact, and we may see that later in the year if their sales start to slow down. I think they've been reluctant to do so because the models that are out on the shelf now have not been really the focus of the recalls. But I think that that is often a tried and true trick that are used in the auto industry, and that we may see some of it later. But we think that there are a lot of shoes left to drop in this instance, and that GM's reputation damage is still likely to have an impact on sales, just a delayed impact.
When you say there are a lot of shoes still to drop, is that just we're going to hear about more incidences, more crashes?
Yes, actually, there are likely to be more congressional hearings. As you may have seen, there was a report yesterday that as many as 74 deaths may be associated with this recalls. There are victims whose names haven't been released yet, and stories that haven't been told, an awful lot yet to be revealed as to who knew what and when. And so I think that the impact of this has not been fully seen yet.
Chris, why does it take so long for this reputational damage to take hold? Let's consider for a moment Target. Target suffers a massive data breach. People hear about it, and you see an almost immediate impact on Target sales. But that's not happening here with GM.
Yes, I think the Target is a good example in the sense that Target really hadn't put their finger on exactly how this unfolded, and those consumers felt immediately at risk to go to that store and use their credit card and put their identity and their privacy at risk. Whereas in the case of these GM recalls, those vehicles have 4 years since been off the market, and so the models that are on the shelf aren't as impacted, and so the sales cycle and the change in behavior takes longer to filter in. In the case of Lululemon, for example, those recalls were initiated in March of 2013, yet in the second quarter they saw a 22% sales increase, 20% in the third, and it was not until the fourth quarter that you saw a drop to 7%, and they were still growing. And that's how long it takes to filter into the buying habits.
Do you actually think, if we look at certain industries, it affects different consumers in different ways? If you look at Lululemon, Was I that, I'm a Lululemon shopper. Did I actually care about the recall? Maybe not. Did I actually care about the comments from the CEO? I still like their pants. When you're talking about Tylenol, a life or death situation, cars where it could crash, that's a different situation entirely.
Absolutely. That's another example of the severity of the risk, right? So I spend a little bit of money on a yoga pants that aren't perhaps completely opaque, whereas in the case of Tylenol or a death in a Toyota or a GM Crest, that's much more severe risk. And so it really depends on the severity of that risk and how much that risk is embedded in the products that are currently on the shelf. If they're currently embedded on the shelf and it's a severe risk, you're going to see a significant change in behavior right away, whereas if it's not such a severe risk and it's not so related to what I'm buying now, that's going to take more time to filter into changes in habit and reputation.
Chris, the consensus is that General Motors did not handle these recalls well. At least the initial phase of the recall, Mary Barra's testimony, her first testimony to Congress. To what degree do consumers care about that? And if they do, what does GM need to do better?
Yeah, actually, this is a tremendous opportunity, and customers see these recalls as rare moments of truth where they get to really see whether companies care about their profits first or whether they care about the best interests of their customers. And so what the opportunity is when one of these crises occurs is to go beyond the expectation of customers, show them that you're going to put their best interests first and not so much focus on limiting your legal liability and financial cost.
How do you do that? How do you show the customer that his or her best interests come first?
Yeah, so an instance I would think with General Motors is to come out and say, we haven't worked out all the details yet, but we are committed to doing the right thing for those people that have been victims of this defect, and we're going to compensate those and not hide behind our bankruptcy filing. That's a demonstration that they're going to put the victim's interests first and not try to minimize their costs. Things like that show transparency, honesty, and integrity.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for giving us your thoughts today. Hopefully the automakers were listening. Chris Malone, managing partner at Fidelum Partners.
Coming up here.